Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar today, Go Electric, the benefits of home electrification. I'm Joe Archunas with Electrify Now and NBI, here as always with my teammate Brian Stewart. And we are presenting today's webinar with San Diego Learn. It's a workforce education and training program that's focused on electrification, and super excited to partner with them. All right. So today we're going to do a high-level view of electrification and the benefits it has for homeowners. We're going to talk about all-electric homes and how they both lower energy bills, they clean both indoor air and outdoor air, reducing both air pollution and carbon pollution, and they increase comfort and safety in the home. So we're going to give a high-level view of the technologies that make this happen. And, we're at this pivotal moment in our climate crisis where decarbonization is crucial, and electrifying everything is a key way to achieve decarbonization. And fortunately for us, we have all electric technologies that help us decarbonize everything and increase our home comfort and save us money. And we thought that this graph here showed a little bit of this point well. Over the last 30 years, the fossil fuel appliances, the gas furnace and the gas water heater just have gotten a little bit more efficient, 2% more efficient. And you compare that to the all-electric technologies that are based on heat pumps, which we'll be talking about a lot more today. And you can see how much more efficient heat pumps have gotten over the last 30 years. 30% for a heat pump, 40% for an air conditioner, 150% for a refrigerator, and over 200% for a heat pump water heater. So electric technologies, and as evidenced by the LED light bulb, which replaced the incandescent light bulbs, are both more efficient and cost less and help us decarbonize our homes. So exciting on all fronts. So today we're going to be doing a high-level overview of the key electrification technologies that help us electrify our homes. We're going to look at heat pump water heaters, heat pumps for space heating, induction ranges that help us decarbonize our cooking and have superior performance, and electric vehicles, which help us decarbonize our transportation. We're not going to touch too much on the electric fireplace and heat pump dryer. We're going to do separate deep dives into those topics, but we'll touch on them today.
Yeah, and we'll be covering each of these topics in a lot more detail later, but today you'll get, I think, a good idea of the big picture. And one way to see how much impact all these things have is to think about your own home. And first of all, it's interesting to note that about 60% of the carbon emissions that we're responsible for as individuals comes from the energy that we purchase. So think about it as your electric bill, your gas bill, the gasoline you put in your cars, et cetera. So it's a huge chunk of our personal carbon emissions just come from energy. And the four big ones are electricity. And on average in the United States, 3 to 6 tons of carbon is emitted for every household in the country, just from the electricity that we use. One car is going to produce somewhere between 4 and 8. Of course, it depends on how much you drive it and how big it is, all those things, how much mileage it gets. But average is 4 to 8. A gas furnace is pretty similar to a car, 3 to 8 for a furnace. And then a gas water heater is going to be somewhere between 1 and 3. And again, that's going to depend on how big your household is, how many teenagers you have using hot water, et cetera. But these are the 4 biggest sources of carbon emissions in most people's lives. And you can see what happens when we combine renewable energy and electrification with these technologies that Joe mentioned. First of all, you can get renewable energy into your home. You can do it today. We're going to talk about that. That would reduce your electricity emissions to 0. You can use that electricity to charge your car, which is what we do, what Joe does in our house. That means 0 tons from your transportation. You can use that clean energy to heat and cool your home with heat pumps we'll be talking about. And of course, you can use that same technology for 0 emissions hot water. So now in this home that's using renewable electricity and electrification, you dramatically reduce carbon emissions. So for a typical home in the United States with 2 cars, you're talking about something like 20 tons. It could be more than this, but that's a good average for a household in the United States with 2 cars. If you just electrify today without the renewable energy, using today's grid as it is, no changes, you would cut your carbon emissions in half immediately just through electrification. But of course, when you take this added step of going to renewable energy, which is what's happening in the grid anyway, but you can do it today, we'll talk about that, you can cut that emissions from 20 tons to 0 tons. And the exciting thing about this is you would also reduce your energy expenses dramatically. Average about 7,000 for a home with 2 cars, down to more like 4,000 for a home with 2 electric cars. So you can see why this is so exciting, why there's so much energy behind this idea of electrifying everything, which is just referring to this future, a sustainable future, where we're getting all the energy we need from the wind and the sun, and we're using that to power all our primary energy needs, which are electricity, transportation, and heat. Those are the big ones. There really isn't anything else that we use energy for as individuals, and the technologies to do this are available today. And this electrification transformation, this movement that's happening for economic and for climate reasons, comes with all these other benefits. Huge energy cost savings, like we mentioned, it's $1,000 per household. Multiply that by millions of households. It's a huge number nationally. It's in the billions. Cleaner air, because think about it, where does carbon or air pollution come from? It mostly comes from burning fossil fuels. It makes much more available clean water. All this leads to healthier people and a much stronger economy. So there's tons of reasons to be enthusiastic about this electrification transformation, and good reasons for all of us as individuals to be part of this movement. We recognize that it can be a little confusing or daunting sounding, so we'll try to make it really simple. If you go to our website, you see it organized this way. Do it in steps, and we'll talk about that today. First of all, you want to make sure you get clean electricity into your home. And that's one of the easiest and maybe one of the most important things to do. Then electrify your home by getting rid of everything you have that burns fossil fuels. Electrify your transportation, which we'll talk about. And we won't talk about it as much today, but we really want to make people aware that this number 4, electrify everyone, that means a couple of things. You can think about one as, you talking to your friends and family about how good this is, but we also need to make sure that we bring everyone along this journey with us, and not just those of us who can afford to make these transformations, but people who might be really income challenged to do this in their own homes.
Yeah, so let's dive into some of these clear steps to electrify everything. This first one, clean up your electric supply, is crucial. And what does that look like for the average person? Well, for the first part, for our electric grid is getting cleaner on its own, and this is pretty exciting. Electricity emissions from electricity hit their peak around 2007, 2008, and since then they've declined by almost 40%, which, as you can see by the white line here. So emissions have been declining, and that's from coal plants retiring and renewables soaring, wind and solar power. And so you can see in the yellow line that the electricity has stayed about constant. We've had amazing efficiency that has kept our electricity use flat. But while our electricity use is about the same as it was for the last 15 years, our emissions have declined dramatically. So the electric grid is getting cleaner on its own, and states and the federal government have a lot of plans to completely decarbonize it, maybe as soon as next decade. So that's exciting. But you don't have to wait for your electricity to become decarbonized. You can do that today and help support the jobs and the infrastructure that we need to have zero carbon electricity. And so we outline 3 ways that you can do that. Number 1, you can sign up for green power plans from your local utility. This is usually pretty easy. Most utilities offer a green power plan for a nominal cost that allows you to purchase and support renewable energy. The other way to do that is to install rooftop solar. If you live in a home that has good solar access, solar panels have come down in cost dramatically over the last decade and are more accessible than ever to many homes. So you want to make sure to check that out. And then the third way we want to illustrate is community solar. Community solar is a relatively new concept where people come together to support the building of PV solar arrays in their community, but not necessarily at their house. So what does that look like? It's you subscribe for community solar, and usually you do that through a private company that sets up a community solar development, but you pay your normal utility bills and you just pay to support this community solar. You're guaranteed that 100% of the renewable energy that this is producing is going onto the grid. So the electricity you use in your home isn't necessarily, it's not the same electrons that these solar panels are feeding into the grid, but this solar development is supporting new renewable electricity that is going into the grid. And then usually you see a little bit of a bill savings, a 5% discount for most homes, and then low-income subscribers usually see more of a discount. They're usually easy sign up and cancellation, no termination fees. So if it's available in your area, community solar can be a great way to make sure that your electricity is completely clean. And here's a little map that shows the areas that have community solar currently and other areas that are working on it. You can visit our website, electrifynow.net, to learn how to sign up for community solar and if it's available in your region. So that is a great way to decarbonize your electricity. Okay, so let's go to step number 2, electrify your home. So this is the home is an area we have a lot of control over to help decarbonize and stop burning fossil fuels. And let's look at some of the key appliances that will help us do that. Heat pumps are a crucial technology that we are going to talk about a lot today and throughout the series. Heat pumps are might be a new name to some folks, but it's a very well-established technology. They've been around for decades. You're seeing a picture of a fridge. A fridge is a heat pump. It's pulling warm air from your fridge and it's exhausting it into your kitchen. You might know that your kitchen or behind your fridge is a little warmer. Well, that's because the heat pump pulls that warm air. It moves warm air. And it does so incredibly efficiently and incredibly effectively. We know that in the hottest days, our fridges can keep our food cold and our ice frozen. And we can use those to heat our water and our space as well. So let's look at some technologies that use heat pumps. We'll start with one of my favorites, the heat pump water heater. It's a heat pump and a water heater combined. And it's an incredible technology that avoids 1 to 3 tons of CO2 just with one water heater. You switch out your water heater, you can avoid a ton of CO2 a year. And you can save $200 to $400 a year depending on your current water heater type. And so how do they work? Well, as we said, it pulls, you can see on the left, the warm air, the heat pump water heater pulls the warm air from the room, or pulls the warmth from the air in the room, and then it heats your water with that warmth. And all it does is exhaust cool air. So one thing to think about your heat pump water heater when you're installing it is where you want to install it. The basements or garages are great spots for heat pump water heaters. But I have mine in a utility closet, and a lot of folks do. You just want to think about where you're going to exhaust that cool air and what that looks like. And there's lots of models available from all the major manufacturers and more coming into the game, always a lot more. Like, for example, Bosch is getting in with a heat pump water heater this year and other manufacturers. And most of the heat pump water heaters to date have come with 240 volts. So that's the same electricity as your dryer. But there are new models starting in 2022. A couple manufacturers have models that plug into a standard 120 volt outlet. So you can heat up all the water you need, but not have to add new electrical supply. And these work really well for a gas replacement because a lot of gas water heaters don't have electricity on site. And so, and running an electrical line, it can work for a lot of folks, but for some folks that might be cost prohibitive. So these water heaters are emerging as a great gas water heater replacement.
Yeah. Hey, we'll be going into a lot of more detail on this topic because it's one that a lot of people are really interested in. We'll have a separate webinar just on this, but it's also good to know that if you've got an electric resistance water heater right now, you can save a ton of money and it's an easy swap out. If you've got a gas water heater now, it's a little bit more complicated because you might have to run a circuit, but either way, you're going to save a lot of money by shifting to a heat pump water heater. Okay, for space heating, using the same technology, we can heat and cool our homes. This is kind of like if a heat pump water heater is like a refrigerator in reverse, a heat pump for space heating is like a refrigerator that can operate in both directions. So you can heat and cool with this technology. It can avoid huge amounts of carbon, particularly, it doesn't matter whether you've got electric resistance or a gas furnace now or an oil furnace, you're going to avoid unbelievable amounts of carbon by shifting this direction and save a lot of money. Electric resistance homes are really expensive to heat. So that's one of the really obvious places where this technology makes a big difference. If you've got gas heating in your home, and it will vary depending on where you are, in terms of how much you will save. It depends on the various rates between gas and electric, but in general, you're going to see cost savings that can be modest to quite significant by shifting to an air source heat pump. There's 2 basic versions of these that you will see, and sometimes they're even combined. But the one on the left is the common situation if you've got a gas furnace where you've got a furnace maybe in your basement or in a utility room that's connected to ducts that's blowing warm air through your home. Essentially, you would take the furnace out and replace it with an air handler, And then you would have this external unit, which is much like, looks almost exactly the same as air conditioner external unit. And that is the device that's, absorbing the heat from outside and concentrating it in this refrigerant line that's pumped into the house. And then that's transferred back to air inside and blown through your home. And as I mentioned, these will work in both directions for heating and cooling. So the one on the left is the typical swap out for a gas furnace. If you've got electric baseboard heat in your home right now, you would probably be looking at the version on the right, which is called ductless, or oftentimes referred to as mini splits, where it has the same type unit outside, but instead of blowing air through your ducts, because you don't have ducts if you've got baseboard heating, you would have these wall-mounted units. They're called wall-mounted heads, they often refer to them, and that's blowing warm or cool air through your homes. It's common to combine these, like particularly in older homes. Upstairs might not be well serviced by the ducts, so you might have the central system that's keeping your downstairs warm and cool, but have one of these upstairs units just to augment the upstairs rooms. So super efficient. The mini split versions on the right are absolutely the most efficient version, because you don't lose there's no losses through ducting, but both of these will save you money and also increase the value of your home. This is an interesting study from the University of Maryland that showed that heat pumps add $10,000 to $17,000 to the value of a home, typically because people recognize the benefit. The heating and cooling is part of it, the energy savings, et cetera. So these kinds of upgrades, you can think of them as being, good for comfort, good for your short-term expenses, and long-term, they increase the value of your home. Because of all these things, Americans are catching on. We're smart. We see a good deal when we, or know a good deal when we see it. And so this is what's happening with heat pump sales over the last 5 years. You can see 5 years ago, before heat pumps were really well known around the country, they were mostly being used in the southern part of the country for air conditioning. Only 46% of sales were heat pumps in 2018. And now it's changed. It's flipped completely. And now the majority of sales for home heating and cooling are heat pumps. And that trend is continuing. Even this year, we see the same thing. If anything, is picking up momentum. And this is, that data is sort of before the incentives were really taking place. And now that we have incentives, we'll talk about, that should accelerate. Okay, let's talk about cooking. So you might say, well, hey, cooking wasn't one of those 4 things that you talked about as being a big carbon or cost issue in homes. And that's true. So your stove, if you have a gas stove, is not a major source of your carbon emissions, but it is a huge source of indoor air pollution. And so when it comes to indoor air quality, one of the most important things to do is get rid of your gas stove. And fortunately, I think a lot of people have had bad experiences, or some people at least have had bad experiences with electric ranges in the past, but induction cooking just blows any other cooking technology away in terms of performance. It's safer, it heats really quickly. And on this indoor air quality, it's a game changer. The American Medical Association this past year has come out with statements that said that use of a gas stove increases household air pollution and the risk of childhood asthma and asthma severity, particularly in older adults. This increased risk is not insignificant. If you have a child living in a home with a gas range, they are 42% more likely to develop asthma symptoms. So it's a big risk. Stanford has also done studies that show that basically using your gas stove is similar to smoking cigarettes in your home in terms of the benzene and other cancer-causing agents that are released into your home when you use even a single burner of your stove. And then the other thing is that, indoor air pollution is not regulated by that. There's no standards. Outdoor air pollution is highly regulated. But what we do in our homes would be illegal in most cases outside. So your gas stove, and the time it takes to fry an egg, you're created indoor air pollution that would be illegal if it was happening outside. And ventilation solves some of those problems, but not all, because a lot of these pollutants are heavier than air. So studies show that ventilation is, you should use it if you have it, but it's not going to solve the problem most likely. And a lot of people don't use it or don't even have it. So induction has none of those problems because you do not have any carbon monoxide or nitrous oxide emissions from using your induction stove, because there's no combustion. There's no leaking methane, so there's no benzene and other cancer-causing agents that are leaked continually into your home. And from a ease of use, a risk of, from a safety standpoint, I was surprised to learn that cooking fires are the #1 source of house fires in the United States, and the #1 source of fire-related injuries are from cooking. It's virtually impossible to start a fire with an induction range because there's nothing that gets hot except for the pan. There's no open flame. I remember in my life when we had our gas stove, countless numbers of dish rags I lit on fire as I was moving pot from one place to another. No chance of that happening. And you can see here, the surface stays cool to the touch. This image, I love it because you can see this chocolate bar where the chocolate bar is just touching the surface of this induction range, which is switched on. The chocolate bar won't melt because there's no heat. Where it's in the pan, it melts because what's happening with induction is the induction stove excites the molecules in the pan. So all the energy goes into the pan. That makes them super efficient. But it also means that the surface is not getting hot. If you spill something on it, it's not going to bake on there, and it's super easy to clean and low risk of injury. And then just from a use standpoint, there's lots of statistics we can show you that show that the performance increases, and we'll get into that more detail in our webinars on this topic. But just look at this one thing. In terms of boiling water, induction is twice as fast as either an electric resistant stove or a really big beefy gas burner. And so you're just able to heat things faster. Same is true for cooling, by the way. All the major manufacturers are supplying these products now, and they have a range of prices from entry level in the around $600 all the way up to those super fancy ones for premium kitchens that replace like maybe a Wolf range or something like that. And so there's plenty of options and more all the time. So lots of things to choose from. If you're thinking about trying this out and you're maybe not ready to replace your stove yet, one thing we highly recommend is to get an induction hot plate. You can, for under $100, even as low as $60, you can get one of these that plug right into 120 volts on your countertop, and you will be able to try induction in your own home and get to see the benefits of it. And if it's also a great strategy if you're a renter, because if maybe your apartment has a gas stove and you can't change it, you could buy one of these little induction hot plates and use it for most of your cooking, because most of the time we just use one burner anyway. So these are a great deal. All of these things we're talking about, whether they're heat pump water heaters or heat pumps for space heating or kitchen appliances like induction ranges, these products are all coming from all the brands that that we grew up with. They're the premium brands. This is not some kind of niche, like, whoa, never heard of that before. No, everyone knows that these devices are the future. All the manufacturers are devoting essentially all of their R&D to these products. I know from talking to the manufacturers, nobody's working on new gas furnaces. You're going to see the exact same furnaces from now forever, because all the R&D is being focused on heat pumps, and that's true on kitchen appliances as well.
Great. All right. Well, let's round out our tour of the all-electric home and its benefits by talking about electrifying your transportation. And of course, the electric car is part of your home and part of your carbon emissions. And switching from a gas car to an electric can save between 4 and 8 tons of CO2. That's one of the biggest chunks of your emissions, and one switch can save you on those tons, and you're able to save between 1,000 and 1,500 a year. And we want to say, I saw this in the chat as well. This is high. These are national averages, so this is highly dependent on where you live. In some areas with higher electricity costs, you may save less. Some, as Brian was saying earlier, may be about cost parity. In very rare instances, will switching to electric actually cost a little bit more. But in the vast majority of the U.S., you will save money. It just will depend on how much, depending on your local area. And these are just national averages. So EVs have so much to recommend them. They are both safer. Brian and I were talking earlier about a recent study showing that EVs have had 40% fewer crashes. They have better performance. Folks who have driven an EV know the instant torque and the handling are just incredible with all electric motors. And the savings and cost is amazing. We're going to look at that in a second. So you can see from this slide here, this is an apples to apples comparison because it's the same vehicle, a Hyundai Kona and a Hyundai Kona EV. And for $10 of gas, you can get about 87 miles on your Hyundai Kona. But with that same $10 of electricity, you're up to about 266 miles. So they're more energy efficient and you get way more mileage for the same dollar. And not only that, the emissions are just dramatically lower for electric vehicles. Just with the electric grid today, you're only you have 1.2 tons of CO2 with your electric EV, but if you get a renewable energy, like we talked about earlier, that can go down to 0, whereas the gas car is emitting about 4.5 tons of CO2 per year. And we just wanted to do a little comparison. Folks will see that sometimes the upfront cost of an EV is more expensive, but thanks to tax credits that were recently renewed, usually most vehicles will receive the $7,500 EV rebate. And then you want to check your state or local area if there are extra rebates. That varies across the nation. So you want to double check if you get more rebates. So that can bring the upfront cost about cost parity between a standard gas car and its electric equivalent. And then look at the 5-year fuel costs and maintenance costs. They're just dramatically lower for the electric vehicle. In this case, it's saving about $5,000 a year. Just anecdotally, I brought my tires to be rotated on my electric vehicle that I've had for 5 years the other day. And the brakes were checked out and they're still in great shape. I've never had to do anything on the brakes after 5 years and almost 60,000 miles because of the regenerative braking of electric vehicles. So a lot of savings on both fuel and maintenance, and with new tax credits, the upfront cost is almost at parity with their gas counterparts. And, we keep hearing this narrative that EV sales are slowing down. We don't really see that in the data and the numbers. Last year, they hit over 1 million vehicles. 1.2 million were sold in the US in 2023, and they're expecting potentially 1.9 million in 2024. EV sales are booming. And on the West Coast, you can see those incredible percentages. Around 20% of vehicles are electric. And we're far along the technology adoption curve with EVs.
Okay, so you may be thinking, well, okay, how do I pay for all these changes? First of all, we don't expect anyone, probably in most cases, to do these things all at once. Joe and I have done all of these things we've talked about in our own homes, but it can take some time. You might not be, particularly if you just bought a new furnace, for example, you might not be keen on replacing it. But when it's time, there's incentives available for almost all these things that we've talked about. So there are state and local and federal incentives, and that's going to vary dramatically from place to place. What we're showing you here are the federal tax credits. Federal tax credits that are available to everyone up to these amounts. So it depends, on your situation. For a heat pump water heater and heat pump, for example, it's 30% of the cost up to $2,000. But there's money, as we mentioned, for EVs and also for chargers. We didn't mention that, but there's $1,000 from the federal government for chargers, and there's a lot of money at the local and state level for those types of things as well. There's rebates from the federal government that are coming. We don't know exactly what those are going to look like yet, but those will be able to help us reduce costs of induction stoves and heat pump dryers as well. So if you live in California and also Washington now, the switch is on. I know we have a lot of people tuning in from California. This website, the Switch is On, is a great place to learn about all the things we talked about, but also to find the incentives that are available to you. You can go on this website, check out there and find incentives, and it'll give you everything from all the utilities that are in your area to the state ones to the federal rebates available to you. Also give you good information about installers that you could talk to for doing any of these things that we've mentioned. If you live in Oregon, there's a similar website there called Electrify Oregon that has all the same kind of information. We're also big fans of Rewiring America, and we'll be talking about a planning tool that they have that in our next webinar that helps walk you through all these things we've talked about step by step to make it easier for you to do these things in your own home. So these are great resources. If you go to Electrify Now, you'll see we have everything we've talked about. We'll have summarized there on our website. But if once you're ready to actually do something, go to our Take Action page and you'll see it organized like this, where you can push any of these buttons and learn more about how to install a heat pump water heater, et cetera, and really get into the nitty-gritty of doing it yourself.
Great.
So thank you. Yeah, and let's should we answer some questions, Joe?
Yeah, that sounds great. We heard from a couple folks, Brian, maybe a first one for you on the kind of calculations behind carbon savings and monetary savings that we've shown so far today. Could you talk to us a little bit about how we're calculating the carbon savings and the monetary savings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And, it varies by device, but basically what you can get very good information from the federal government and other sources on, for example, heating loads in nationally or in various states. There's information about energy costs. So what I've used for what we talked about today are national average energy costs, national averages in terms of vehicle miles traveled, national averages for cost of electricity and natural gas and gasoline, and the national averages for the carbon emissions from each of those things. So it's quite straightforward to make those calculations. As Joe mentioned, it's going to vary slightly from place to place, but I can tell you that I have done these calculations for Oregon, Washington, California, Virginia, Florida, Minnesota, and other places. And in every case, there's cost savings when you do this, when you make this complete transformation. In California, for example, that's the place where heat pumps, for example, and heat pump water heaters are closer to parity in terms of the cost savings. But automobiles are dramatic savings in California. That's the biggest savings in the whole country is there because gasoline prices are so expensive. So a fully electrified home in California is absolutely going to save money. But on a device by device basis, it can be different from place to place.
Yeah. Sounds good. I'm going to answer a question from Deidre in the chat. She just had a quick question on going back to the water heaters, and we were talking about the plug-in 120-volt water heaters, wondering how well they perform in cold climates. We'll do a deep dive on these 120 volts, but just suffice it to say, in cold climates, most water heaters are located in basements within the building's envelope because you don't want to store your water heaters somewhere where the pipes can freeze. And basements are a great location for heat pump water heaters and 120-volt heat pump water heaters because you have that under the ground temperature, which holds a consistent temperature even in the winter. And so we are finding folks, there's currently a field study with 120 volts in the Midwest. I've installed one in our Cleveland home. And some of the 120-volt water heaters have a small electric resistance backup for maybe potentially the coldest days of the year when temperatures might drop low. But if your water heater is in your basement, there's a good possibility that 120 volt might work well for you.
I see there's a question here about community solar and why a utility would say that participants in community solar raise prices for non-participants. That's a common line you hear from utilities. They make the same argument about solar power on our rooftops, and there's been a lot of debunking of that. But I think in general, it's important to recognize, I don't want to demonize the electric utilities because, they are essential to our transformation to a clean energy economy. And a lot of them are doing really good things. But it is important to recognize that, the model that they have, the business model they have, which we've set up and we've been operating comfortably for almost 100 years in this country, is that they make money by building new things, new energy generation, new transmission. That's how they make money, not so much on just the rates. So when community solar comes along, that's somebody else building the stuff. They don't make much money on it, so they're not that excited about it. But the truth is, these programs get mandated by law, and they get put in state by state for those reasons. They come with tremendous benefits to community economies, to low-income ratepayers, et cetera. So I don't really care too much what the utilities say. When these programs are available, you should absolutely take advantage of them and lobby for them if they're not available in your state.
Great. Well, touching on, there's a couple questions in chat about electric vehicles. Some folks were asking about hybrids. Maybe in a good, better, best scenario, hybrids would be the good. They're a little bit more efficient gas cars. But we want to get to the better, which is the plug-in hybrids, where you can plug it in and run on electricity, usually for 20 to 40 miles. So that covers most of your driving, and then you have a gas backup for your longer trips. And then I think the best would be the electric vehicle, the lowest carbon emissions, most savings, And another person was asking about EV road trips. I'm a huge believer. We've gone across country back and forth. They're doing that again this summer. And we're all benefiting from the fact that most auto manufacturers are moving to one charging standard, the Tesla NACS charging standard. So all the plugs will almost become uniform, and most folks should be able to, starting this year, start to use the Tesla superchargers, which are 60% of all fast charging is owned by Tesla, and they have the best performance and most chargers out there. So most other vehicles will now be able to use those Tesla chargers, which is really exciting, making long distance travel even easier.
I see a couple of good questions about converting from gas furnaces to heat pumps and why installation professionals might be reticent to do that for you. That's a great question. And one of the things that Joe and I have both experienced ourselves is we've had people, the so-called experts, the heat pump contractors, et cetera, try to talk you out of this, or maybe a plumber will talk you out of it and say, you're crazy to put in a heat pump water heater. You know, again, I don't want to throw these good people under the bus because there's a lot of really great contractors out there, but there are some, it's just true, who are not that willing to learn all these new things that are coming along, and they're happier to just stick with the things they've been doing their whole careers. I know from working with these people that, roughly speaking, there's a third or so of those contractors out there who are super excited about this technology, convinced that it's the future and have it in their own homes. There's another third that will probably sell you whatever you want. And then there's another third who would just as soon put in gas furnace because they know how to do that and it's really easy for them. So that's why it's important to find the right people to work with, which is why these websites like Switches On, Electrify Oregon, our own website, Electrify Now, we have trusted contractors on our websites, and all these websites do. I highly recommend you use those kinds of sources to find good contractors, because those are the people you want to be working with. We'll go into this more in detail on our heat pump webinars, but finding good ones is really important, and they will make sure you get the right thing as well.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we have a time for one or two more questions. Someone brings up a great question on resilience in the all-electric home. If we are switching to just all electric, appliances, what happens when the power goes out? And this is a great question. We'll be covering in depth in a couple of our Go Electric webinars, and we've covered. You can check out our YouTube page, Google Electrify Now YouTube. So there's a couple of thoughts on resilience. For example, you can get batteries to back up your home. My wife and I are in the process of getting 2 batteries that can power our home for a couple of days, and they're paired with our solar energy. So we will have increased resilience in our all-electric home with home battery systems. So that's one effort. The other one are vehicles. Those are emerging as batteries on wheels. And Ford, GM, Tesla, VW have all announced or are coming out with chargers that can do what is called bidirectional charging. So you can take the energy from your vehicle and use it to power your home. This is kind of nascent, but we should be seeing a lot more of this over the next couple of years.
I noticed that GM just mentioned that all their cars are going to be coming with that feature in the future, like starting now, basically, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and Brian, you should talk a little bit about resilience hacks, electrification resilience hacks, which we'll be profiling as well.
Yeah, you can. We have a section on our website on the Take Action area, which is how to survive a power outage, which gives you some relatively low cost ways to stay safe during a power outage. It's not the same as running your house just like you used to when there's no power. You need a lot of batteries for that currently, or an EV like Joe mentioned. But there are some really nice things you can do just to stay safe, be able to cook, charge your phones, and have some lights, etc., that aren't too expensive. So check that out. There's some good information there. There's a great question here about addressing, the low-income households and the difficulty of transitioning for folks who are low income. Obviously, a lot of these folks may be renting, so they don't even have control over the sources of heat in their homes. And I think it's we could have a whole conversation just on this one topic, but one thing I think it's really important to know is that a lot of policy that's being instituted at the state and the national level recognizes this issue and is prioritizing money for low-income homes. So, for example, this rebate program that we talked about that hasn't rolled out yet from the federal government that's coming this year, probably state by state. There's a lot of money for income qualified people only. So that's one example. Community solar, like we mentioned, it can be a 40% saving on electricity bills if you're income qualified for community solar. Then there's I know here in Oregon, there's a lot of state policy that's prioritizing money for low-income ratepayers. So I think there's a national recognition that this is an issue. As individuals, we can help with philanthropy. There's organizations that actually all they do is help electrify low-income families, help them save money on their energy bills. So that's something we have some information on our website about that as well.
Yeah, and I'll just highlight for on this piece, we're profiling the largest maker of manufactured homes, Clayton Homes, who has now, because thanks to IRA tax credits, has gone to all electric for their space and water heating, and offering these homes at a no increase in price to their customers. So proving that the all electric home doesn't have to be more costly and more premium. So with that, I think we are at time for our initial overview of electrification. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate that. Check out our next webinar, How to Plan for Your Electrification, on May 15th. All the details are on our website.
Yeah, thanks all for tuning in. Good luck with your electrification project, and we look forward to talking with you further about all these things in more detail and answering more of your questions, because I'm sure there's a lot out there that we weren't able to get to today. So thank you all for tuning in today, and we hope to see you at one of our upcoming webinars in the future.